Welcome to my first ever video. Today we're going to be looking at internal and external factors in class differences in achievement using the AQA exam board. Most of this information is taken from the AQA A-Level Sociology Book 1 by Webb, Westergard, Trone and Townend. This is merely a simplification of the textbook itself, and I would urge anybody looking to understand A-Level Sociology to read it. FYI, I'm not qualified, I'm just a student. This is purely for my revision, to be honest. So the first thing we need to look at is class differences in achievement. So the first things that we do is cultural deprivation. So cultural deprivation is certain groups, particularly the working class, lacking the necessary cultural capital such as language skills, socialization, values, parental support, etc. So next we do is material deprivation. So that is certain groups, particularly the working class, lacking the necessary funds for basic resources vital to standard of living. So in the context of education, there's textbooks, school trips, free school meals, etc. So lastly, we have cultural deprivation. Sorry, not cultural deprivation, cultural capital. And we'll discuss that later on. So, what do we know? So we know that the Centre for Longitudinal Studies in 2007 found that by the age of 3, children from disadvantaged backgrounds are already up to 1 year behind those from privileged homes, and the gap widens with age. The thing we're going to discuss is cultural deprivation. So many sociologists argue working class families fail to socialise their children adequately. These same children end up culturally deprived, lacking the cultural equipment to do well in school, therefore underachieving. There are 3 main aspects of cultural deprivation. They are language, parents' education, and working class subculture. The thing we're going to look at is language. So, Hobbs, Tate et al. In 2002 found that where parents use language that challenges their children to evaluate their own understanding or abilities, cognitive performance improves. So examples of this is, what do you think? Are you ready for the next step? So just to further your understanding, try and think of other examples of challenging language. And additionally, if you know educated parents use this type of language, how do you expect less educated parents' language to look like? So I'll give you some time, like 3 seconds of that. So yeah. So Feinstein found that less educated parents use language in ways that only require children to make descriptive statements. So examples of this is, what's that animal called? And this leads to underachievement. So as before, try and think of some examples of descriptive language. So Feinstein also found educated parents are more likely to use praise compared to non-educated parents. And in 1966, Carl Breiter and Siegfried Engelmann claimed, sorry, is it Engelmann or Engelmann? I'm not really sure. I don't think I said any of that right. That's not the point. Claimed that the language used in working class homes is deficient, describing lower class families as communicating by gestures, single words, or disjointed phrases, and because of this, their children fail to develop the necessary language skills, becoming incapable of abstract thinking and unable to use language to explain, describe, inquire, or compare, and consequently unable to take advantage of the opportunities their school offers. So, speech codes. So Bernstein in 1975 found 2 codes, restricted code and elaborated code. So we'll start with the restricted code. So restricted code is basically speech code typically used by the working class. It has limited vocabulary, it's grammatically simple, it's short, it's unfinished, it can be predictable and descriptive, but most importantly, it is context bound, meaning the speaker assumes that the listener shares the same set of experiences. Next is elaborated code. It's basically the opposite of restricted code, to be honest, but it's typically used by the middle class. It has wider vocabulary, it's more grammatically correct, it's complex, more abstract ideas, most importantly, context free. So, how does this prove educational differences? So the elaborated code is the language typically used by teachers, textbooks, exams, and it is deemed as the correct way to speak, and it's also seen as a more effective tool for analysis and expressing thoughts clearly. So because of this, if middle class children are already using the elaborated codes, they'll feel at home in school, meaning they are more likely to succeed. The thing we need to look at is parents' education. So Douglas in 1964 found that working-class parents placed less value on education and consequently were less ambitious for their children, giving them less encouragement and took less interest in their education. So can you think of any ways they may have exhibited this behaviour? I'll give you 3 seconds just to pause, think of anything. So what they did is they visited their children's schools less often, they were less likely to discuss schoolwork, and overall had lower levels of motivation. But there's other answers that you could have had. So Feinstein in 2008 said, parents' own education is the most important factor of children's achievement, and middle-class parents tend to be better educated and are able to give them an advantage through many ways. So that is parenting style, parents' educational behaviours, use of income, class income, and parental education. We'll start with parenting style. So educated parents emphasise consistency and high expectations, supporting achievement by encouraging active learning and exploration. And by contrast, less educated parents emphasize harsh discipline with phrases such as do as you're told and behave yourself. So Feinstein argues this prevents the child from learning independence and self-control, leading to poor motivation at school. So next is parents' educational behaviour. Educated parents know what is needed to assist their children's educational progress. They place higher value on activities such as reading, tutoring, homework, visits to museums and libraries. Now, use of income. So, educated parents, alongside having more income, are able to use their income in ways that promote their educational success. So, Bernstein and Young found middle-class mothers are more likely to buy educational toys, books, and activities that stimulate intellectual development. In contrast, working-class homes are more likely to lack these resources. Lastly, class income and parental education. Feinstein said parental education has an influence on children's achievement in its own right, regardless of class or income. This explains why not all children of working-class parents do equally badly, and why not all children of middle-class parents are equally successful. Now we'll look at working-class subculture. So a subculture is a group whose values and attitudes differ from those of the mainstream culture. So Sugarman found that working-class subculture has 4 key features that act as a barrier to educational achievement. So they're fatalism, collectivism, immediate gratification, and present time orientation. So fatalism is essentially the belief in fate. So whatever will be, and there is nothing that you can do about it. Collectivism is placing more value in being part of a group rather than succeeding as an individual. Immediate gratification is seeking pleasure now, then making sacrifices for the future. And present time orientation is living in the present, not really having long-term goals. So Sugarman also claims these values exist because of middle-class jobs having more secure careers offering prospects for continuous individual advancement, whereas working-class jobs are less secure with no career structure, nor is there any room for advancement. So compensatory education. So this is programs that aim to tackle the problem of cultural deprivation by providing extra resources to schools and communities in deprived areas. So before I give you some examples, can you think of any yourself? And if so, did they work? So let me give you some seconds, sorry. So examples of this is Operation Head Start, EPAs, and Sure Start. So what I'd recommend you do for your own vision is pick one of these and research it in detail because you only really need 1 or 2. You don't need them all. But yeah. The myth of cultural deprivation. So in 1973, Teddy dismissed the idea that failure at school can be blamed on a culturally deprived home background. She said a child cannot be deprived of its own culture and that working class children are simply culturally different, not culturally deprived. The only reason they fail is because the education system is dominated by middle class values. So instead of seeing working class culture as deficient, schools need to challenge teachers' anti-working class prejudices. Blackstone and Mortimer says that working class parents attend fewer parents' evening because they work longer or less regular hours, not because they aren't interested. There is also evidence to suggest schools with mainly working class pupils have less effective systems of parent-school contacts, making it harder to keep in touch with their children's progress. Moving on to material deprivation. So we found that Department for Education found 1/3 of pupils eligible for free school meals achieve 5 or more GCSEs at A to C. Nearly 90% of failing schools are in deprived areas, and there are 4 aspects of this, which is housing, diet and health, financial support, and the cost of education and fear of debt, which we'll now discuss. Start with housing. So overcrowding means less room for educational activities, such as nowhere to do homework, disturbed sleep, etc. This makes it harder for the child to study, and for younger children, development can be impaired through a lack of space for safe play and exploration. In terms of temporary housing, families may find themselves moving frequently, resulting in constant changes of school and disrupted education. There is also evidence to suggest that families in temporary accommodation suffer more psychological distress. Poor housing can also have indirect effects. So children in crowded homes run a greater risk of accidents. Furthermore, cold or damp housing leads to ill health. This all leads to more absences from school. So now we'll talk about diet and health. Howard in 2001 found that young people from poorer homes have lower intakes of energy, vitamins, and minerals. Wilkinson found that the lower the social class, the higher rate of hyperactivity, anxiety, and conduct disorders. And blending and matching found children from low-income families were more likely to engage in externalizing behaviour. So back to what Howard said, poor nutrition weakens the immune system and lowers children's energy levels, resulting in more absences from school and difficulties concentrating in class. So we'll move on to financial support and the cost of education. So David Ball found a theory called cost of free schooling, which basically means children from poor families have to do without equipment and miss out on experiences that would enhance their education. Tanner et al. Found that cost of maintaining education places a heavy burden on parents. So this is stuff like transport, uniforms, books, computers, calculators, sports, music, and art equipment. Ridge found that children from low-income families often need to work and take on jobs such as babysitting, cleaning, and paper rounds, which limits their time. They can't really spend time studying and that. EMAs is financial support given to poorer students staying on in education after 16, abolished in England by the 2011 coalition government. Fear of death. So Calendar and Jackson in 2005 found that working class students saw debt as something to be avoided. They see more costs than benefits of higher education. Working class students are 5 times less likely to apply to university than middle class students, and an increase in tuition fees in 2012 to £9,000 per year, which is ridiculous. It just is ridiculous. It used to be £3,000 and then it changed to £9,000, and then before that it used to be free. Why am I paying £9,000 a year to go to university? I'm doing a year abroad as well, so that's like 9,000 times 4. I'm gonna be in so much debt. Yeah, it's ridiculous. And that, yeah, as a working class student, that definitely puts me off. So yeah. So the National Union of Students found that 81% of those from the higher social class received help from home, 43% from lowest class, and 30% of university students come from the working class. Ray, in 2005, found that working class students are more likely to apply to local universities to save on travel costs. They also work part-time to fund their studies. Dropout rates are higher for working class students dominated universities, so London Metropolitan University takes on more working class students, and the dropout rate is 16.6%, whereas Oxford, I don't think we've got one. I think the dropout rate is 1.5%. I don't think that there's 1.5% of working class students. So yeah. Well, compare cultural deprivation and material deprivation, and how can it work together? So the fact some children in poorer families do achieve suggests that material deprivation can only be part of the whole explanation. The cultural, religious, or political values of the family may have a part in creating and sustaining the child's motivation, even despite their lack of resources. Mortimer and Whitty found that material inequalities have the greatest effect on achievement, and Robinson said tackling child poverty would be the best effective way of boosting achievement. Okay. So moving on to cultural capital, Bordeaux uses the term cultural capital to refer to the knowledge, attitudes, values, language, tastes, and abilities of the middle class. It is a capital because it gives those who possess it an advantage. So through socialization, middle classes acquire the ability to grasp, analyze, and express abstract ideas and are more likely to develop intellectual interest and understanding of what the education system requires for success. Middle class students are at an advantage in school, as such abilities are highly valued and respected because the education system is in fact not neutral, but instead favours the middle class culture. The lack of cultural capital of working class students leads to exam failure because working class students feel education is just not for them and respond in less motivated ways, such as taunting, early leaving, and simply not trying. Educational. Why can't I say that? It's not that hard. Educational and economic capital. Educational, economic, and educational. Educational, economic, and cultural capital can be converted into one another. Middle class children with cultural capital are better equipped to meet the demands of the school curriculum and gain qualifications. Wealthier parents can convert the economic capital into educational capital by sending their children to private schools and paying for extra tuition. Now we'll look at a test of Bordeaux's ideas. Sullivan in 2001 conducted a study of questionnaires of 465 pupils across 4 schools, and she asked pupils about a range of activities such as reading, TV, art galleries, museums, and theatres. She found that those who read complex fiction and watched serious TV documentaries developed a wider vocabulary and greater cultural knowledge. The pupils with the greatest cultural capital were children of graduates and were more likely to be successful at GCSE. Where pupils of different classes had the same level of cultural capital, middle class pupils still did better. Sullivan suggests the greater resources and aspirations of middle class families explain the remainder of the class gap. This is the end of our external factors, so we'll do a little summary. Middle class pupils tend to achieve more than working class pupils. Some explanations focus on factors outside school. These include cultural deprivation, so working class pupils are seen as lacking the right attitudes, values, language, and knowledge for success. Material deprivation means working class children are more likely to have poorer diets, health and housing, and parents who are less able to meet the hidden costs of schooling. And the middle class have more cultural capital. They are better placed to take advantage of the choices offered in the education system. Now we will move on to internal factors. So for internal factors, we've got labelling, the self-fulfilling prophecy, streaming, people subcultures, and people class identities, and the school. So we'll start off with labelling. So labelling means to attach a meaning or definition to a people or a person in general. For example, teachers may label a pupil as bright or thick, troublemaker or hardworking. So before we begin, can you think of a label you have given somebody else or somebody else has given you? I'll give you 3 seconds for this. So, studies show that teachers often attach labels regardless of the pupil's actual ability or attitude. So instead they label pupils on the basis of stereotyped assumptions about their class background, labeling working class pupils negatively and middle class positively. Becker, in 1971, found teachers judge pupils according to how closely they fitted an image of the ideal pupil. The ideal pupil reflects the middle class, whereas the working class are furthest away from it. So labelling in secondary schools. Dunn and Gusley in 2008 found teachers normalised the underachievement of working class pupils and acted as though they could do nothing about it. This affected how the teachers dealt with underachieving pupils. Labelling in primary schools. Rist found that teachers use information about the children's home backgrounds to place them in separate groups, seating each group at a different table. Tigers seated next to her and showed them greatest achievement, so that's the middle class. And clowns sat further away, given lower level books to read and fewer chances to show off abilities, which are working class. Another thing is extension work. So the tigers would get extension work and the clowns wouldn't really get extension work. And I think also I should mention in the secondary schools, the working class pupils would get put into easier exams like foundation maths, even though they have the ability to do higher. You know what I mean? So self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's basically a prediction that comes true simply by virtue of it having been made. It's as simple as that. So the three stages of it is the teacher labels the pupil, the teacher treats the pupil accordingly, and the pupil internalizes the teacher's expectations and acts accordingly. So, for example, if I was labeled as a teacher by being very hardworking, I'm probably going to be hardworking. And if I was labeled by a teacher as disruptive, I'm probably going to be disruptive. So, teachers' expectations. So, Rosenthal and Jacobson told the school that they had a new test designed specifically to identify those pupils who'd spurt ahead. This was untrue. The test was just an IQ test, and the teachers believed what they were told nonetheless. The researchers tested all the pupils and then randomly picked 20% of them and told the school the test had identified these children as spurters. On returning to the school, 47% of those identified as spurters had made significant progress. So, Rosenthal and Jacobson suggest that the teachers' beliefs had been influenced by the test results, which changed how they interacted with them. It should also be noted that the self-fulfilling prophecy can also produce underachievement. If teachers have low expectations, children may develop a negative self-concept, Streaming. So streaming involves separating children into different ability groups or classes called streams, whereby each group is taught separately from another group. This is where the self-fulfilling prophecy is likely to occur. So as Becca suggested, teachers generally do not see working class pupils as the ideal student. They are seen as disruptive and lacking potential and generally have low expectations of them, and because of this are placed into lower streams. So once they're in their stream, it tends to be difficult to progress as they are now locked into their expectations of them. This is done through things like setting lower level tasks, not much homework, etc. This is where the self-fulfilling prophecy occurs. Children get the message and live up to their teachers' low expectations by underachieving. Sorry, I'm going quite ahead. Douglas found children placed in a lower stream at age 8 had suffered a decline in their IQ score by age 11. It should also be noted that middle class students actually benefit from streaming, as they are likely to be placed in higher streams with the teachers viewing them as the ideal pupil, meaning they gain more confidence and work harder to improve their grades. Women and the A-to-C economy. So, in 2001, Gilborn and Udall conducted a study of 2 London secondary schools which showed how teachers use stereotypical notions of ability to stream pupils. They found that teachers are less likely to see working class pupils as having ability and consequently are placed into lower streams and entered for lower tier GCSEs, denying them the knowledge and opportunity needed to gain good grades and further widens the class gap in achievement. So, this leads us on to the next point, exam league tables. Exam league tables rank each school according to its exam performance. Schools focus their time, effort, and resources on those pupils they see as having the potential to get 5 grade Cs to boost the league table position. So this is what Gilbert and Udall use, and they describe it as the educational triage. The triage was used on battlefields. Medics sorted casualties into 3 categories: those who will survive anyways, those who will die anyways, and those who have a chance of survival. They set out their priorities. So this is seen in the educational triage, which is the picture here. You can see they have those who will pass anyways, those with potential, and those who are hopeless cases. It's usually the working class who are sorted into the hopeless cases, just saying. I'm going to go on to pupil subcultures. Basically, this means a group of pupils who share similar values or behavioural patterns. They usually emerge as a response to labelling, but specifically as a reaction of streaming. To see how pupil subcultures develop, we can consider Lacey's concept of differentiation and polarization. So differentiation is a process of teachers categorizing pupils according to how they perceive their ability, attitudes, etc. So streaming is a form of differentiation. Polarization is the process in which pupils respond to streaming by moving towards one or two opposite poles or extremes. So, differentiation is the action of sorting people, and polarization is the reaction to the sorting of people, basically. So, Lacey conducted a study of Hightown boy grammar schools and found streaming polarized boys into pro-school and anti-school subculture. So pro-school subculture is pupils placed in high streams and committed to the values of the school. Their values are those of the school and form a pro-school subculture. Okay. These pupils are mainly middle class and yeah. So anti-school subculture. So pupils placed in low streams suffer a loss of self-esteem and have to look for alternative ways of gaining status, usually through disobeying school rules and being disruptive, forming anti-school subcultures. So Ball found that when schools abolished banding, the basis of polarization was removed and anti-school subcultures declined. However, differentiation continued. Teachers still categorized pupils and still favored the middle class. Ball's study shows how class inequalities can continue as a result of teachers labeling, even without the effects of subcultures or streaming. What is my problem with subcultures? All my days, I can't say it for the life of me. Okay, Woods. So Woods found other responses to differentiation were possible. He specifically found four possibilities. First, ingratiation, which is basically being the teacher's pet. Next, he found ritualism, which is simply staying out of trouble and just dealing with it. And he found retreatism, which is daydreaming and mucking about. And then lastly, he found rebellion, which is just outright rejection of everything the school stands for. And Furlong adds to Wood's ideas. He said pupils are not committed to any one response and may move between different types of responses, especially with different teachers. So, for example, let's say my sociology teacher. If my sociology teacher treated me as if I was like really good and had lots of potential, I'd probably form a pro-school subculture in her class. But if my history teacher, for example, said that I was very disruptive and did no work, then I'd probably perform an anti-school subculture. So yeah. So criticisms. So it's useful in showing schools are not neutral or fair. It's too deterministic and assumes pupils who are labelled have no choice but to fulfil the prophecy. And Marxists say it ignores the wider structures of power within which labelling takes place and argues labels are not merely the result of teachers' individual prejudices, but stem from teachers' work in a system that reproduces class divisions. So people's class identities and the school. So habitus is taken for granted ways of thinking, being and acting that are shared by a particular social class. A group's habitus is decided by their position in the class structure. The middle class has the power to define the habitus as superior, even though one class habitus is not better than the others. So as a result, the school puts a higher value on middle class tastes, preferences, and so on. This can be linked to Bordeaux's cultural capital, which we discussed earlier. So since schools have middle class habitus, schools deem pupils with middle class tastes as superior and deem them to have more worth and value than those with working class tastes. This is seen through clothing and accent. The withholding of symbolic capital is symbolic violence, which reproduces the class structure and keeps the lower classes in their place, meaning there is a clash between the working class habitus and the middle class habitus. So, Nike identities. So Nike identities basically refers to working class people as invest in consuming branded clothing such as Nike as a means of gaining alternative capital. As a result of symbolic violence, wearing these brands becomes a part of their identity and they wouldn't feel themselves without it. These styles please through peer groups and not conforming was social suicide. Conforming meant safety, not conforming left you vulnerable to bullying. Teachers opposed the street style clothing and seen it as a threat and were labelled as rebels. Archer identified two reasons why these pupils rejected higher education. Firstly, it was unrealistic, meaning it wasn't for people like them, but for middle classes. It was a risk investment. Secondly, it was undesirable and would not suit their preferred lifestyle. For example, they would have to live on a budget, meaning they wouldn't be able to afford their street styles, which gave them an identity. So, people's class identities in school. So, working class identity and educational success Ingram 2009 found working class identity was inseparable from belonging to a working class locality. Working class communities placed an emphasis on conformity, class identity and self-exclusion. Evans 2009 found working class people see Oxbridge as not for the likes of us, so they self-exclude. Girls had a strong attachment to their locality. So the relationship between internal and external factors. This is the last slide, so don't worry, we're nearly done. So working class pupils using the restricted speech code, external factor, may be labelled by the teachers as less able, leading to a self-fulfilling prophecy, internal factor. So what teachers believe about working class pupils' home backgrounds, external factor, actually produces underachievement. So can you think of any more? I'm pretty sure this is in the textbook, so if you want to look at more you can. But I promised you this in under 30 minutes, so it's 30.25 right now. So yeah, I'll see you guys. Bye.